Another thing that scholars often say may well be historical. Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. Now notice why would scholars say this is historical? Well, there's not complete agreement about how it happened. There's the Gospel of John doesn't exactly tell you about the baptism of Jesus by John, but it has Jesus and his disciples also baptized in the Jordan, and it has Jesus very much connected to John the Baptist in the beginning of its Gospel. The other Gospels do have Jesus baptized by John.
It's called the synoptic problem. Huge portions of Matthew and Luke appear to have been copied directly, often word for word in the original Greek, over 90% of the content of Mark. And increasingly, scholars are acknowledging that the author of John had access to and was using Mark as a source. When direct copying is going on, it's laughable to think of these as independent sources.
Them often referred to as the criterion of multiple attestation suggests that if Jesus said something or did something in two or more independent sources, then it's got a higher claim to historicity. Well, the problem here is we don't know if we've got independent sources or not.
But notice how the story goes along. All of the writers who have the Gospel of John, who have Jesus baptized by John the Baptist, they have Jesus come to John the Baptist and they say, I want to be baptized. And John the Baptist says, oh no, I shouldn't baptize you. You're the big kahuna. You're bigger than I am. I should, I'm not worthy to untie your sandals. So I should be baptized by you. I shouldn't be baptizing you. And Jesus says, no, it's okay, baptize me. And so he does it, and then you have the confession and the voice from heaven and that sort of thing. Notice what's going on here. The gospel writers are very concerned because they know that it could be interpreted that John baptizing Jesus makes John superior to Jesus.
If you're a regular viewer of my channel, you've heard me speak at length about the criterion of embarrassment before. Most notably, that this is not a historical criteria that is used outside of New Testament studies, only within the New Testament for some reason.
It makes Jesus a disciple of John. And they're not comfortable with that because, of course, they believe Jesus is the Messiah. And so he's therefore superior to John the Baptist. And John the Baptist was just a prophet or a precursor to Jesus. So the story is told to play down this baptism a bit and make Jesus come out as insisting on the baptism, wanting to do it for the right kinds of reasons, but not making Jesus a disciple of John.
And the second criteria, which was more disturbing to me, is sometimes called the criteria of dissimilarity or the criterion of embarrassment. And the basic model was if Jesus says something or did something in the Gospels which would be antithetical to first century Jewish practice or belief and not quite in line with what the church wanted to proclaim. In other words, if it just looks really weird, then Jesus must have done it or said it. And that doesn't quite work either.
And also, this tradition about the baptism of Jesus is in different sources in different ways. So again, scholars say the baptism of John the Baptist in baptizing Jesus doesn't look like something early Christians would make up. In fact, you can even see that they try to tone down its implications. So it's not something they're likely to make up. It kind of goes against their tradition of raising Jesus up completely, and therefore it may be historical. But right now, let's talk about method. How did I get here? First method, first little rule, and this is something that a lot of people use when they do historical Jesus research. It took all the 20th century for people kind of to develop these rules and to spell them out in scholarship. But this is kind of where we are now. The first rule, multiple attestation. That means when you have more than one independent source that has a saying or an event about Jesus, you tend to give it a little more weight. Now, of course, what are independent sources? If you have something in both Matthew and Luke, that doesn't count as two independent sources, right? Because both Matthew and Luke could have gotten that from Mark, or they could have gotten it from Q. But if you have something in Mark and you have something in John...
So in this text, Jesus, rather than being immersed by John, goes out and starts immersing himself. So that preserves Jesus from being in that position of needing immersion. No, he's now the one doing the immersing. John was also immersing at this place nobody can find because there was lots of water there. For John had not yet been thrown in prison. I think to yourself, oh, okay, wait a minute. I think back to Mark. Jesus began his career when John was in prison, right?
Well, those are two independent sources. If you also have something in the Gospel of Thomas, then most of us scholars would say, well, some people say the Gospel of Thomas may have known the other Gospels, but most of us would say we're going to treat him as an independent source because he's not verbatim quoting the other Gospels most of the time. So if you have an event or a saying that occurs in Mark and John and Q.
All Q. The problem now is that the consensus that there is a Q, that document which would have the material common to Matthew and Luke, but not in Mark, the consensus that there's a Q is breaking down substantially through the splendid efforts of a fellow at Duke named Mark Goodacre. And
Or in Thomas. Those are three independent sources. What if it also occurs in Paul's letters? There's another independent source. As we'll see that there are some places where Paul gives us a little clue about something. And then obviously you can take Q as being one of those sources. So if something is in both Matthew and Luke, but it's not in Mark, then you can say it's in Q. And sometimes people would even say you have one form of a parable that seems to have occurred in Q, and you have a different form of that parable that seems to have occurred in Mark. And then you can say, okay, we have this one parable in two independent sources. One is Q and one is Mark.